Hello, everyone. I'm Emily Hughes with Accuracy in Media, and with me is John Wilson, the author of Patriotic Correctness and Academic Freedom and Its Enemies, among several other books. But tonight he's going to be talking to us about the Donald and his upcoming book, Trump Unveiled. So welcome. It's nice of you to be here with us.
Glad to be here.
So let's go ahead and jump right into this wonderful hot topic that we have right now. But first, let's talk a little bit about your book. What prompted you to write it?
Well, I've written a lot of books about political figures. I wrote one about Newt Gingrich 20 years ago. I've written a book about Barack Obama. And so when you had the person as fascinating as Donald Trump and a political movement as fascinating as what Donald Trump has created, I think it's important to look at it and investigate it and criticize it. And so I think it's important, whether people from the right or the left, to take a critical look at these figures and see what they mean and see what views they have, what they represent. And there's a lot of people who don't necessarily know a lot about Donald Trump. They know about him as a celebrity, they know about him from his speeches, but there's just so much coverage, so many things to learn about Donald Trump, and that I think it's important to try and put those all together for my own thinking and to try and put them in a book to try and quickly try to analyze what the Trump movement is all about.
Mm-hmm. And when exactly did you start writing this? Was it fairly recent when he announced that he was running?
Well, much more recent than that.
Oh, okay.
I like a lot of other people, I thought, well, nobody's going to do a book about Donald Trump because he's not going to win. And of course, every political pundit, including myself, would be proven wrong by Donald Trump. And so it's only when it became clear that he was going to be elected that I decided to write the book. So this is a book being written on a very tight deadline to come out in the fall, and it's going to be a book that's meant to sort of synthesize what a lot of people, journalists, have been writing about Donald Trump, to put together some analysis about him. And to try and take that kind of critical perspective on him, but it is difficult, you know, in the kind of flurry of activity that goes on with the campaign to try and take a step back and understand at a deeper level what Donald Trump is all about.
Mm-hmm. And where are you getting most of your information from? And have you spoken to him at all?
Yeah, I haven't spoken to him. I certainly don't expect that I will. And in general, when I write books, I try to do them not so much with the idea that, you know, Donald Trump is not going to say anything new to me that he hasn't said to 1,000 other media outlets. It's about trying to take the tools of analysis and look at what he's saying and try and analyze what he's about. And so there's not going to be any sudden revelations, any news that shocking things that nobody has ever heard before about Donald Trump. But there's just been so much about Donald Trump from all kinds of news outlets, and as well as just Donald Trump himself. It has sort of an endless stream of tweets and interviews that it's very difficult for anyone, as I know, to keep up with what he's saying and what he's thinking on a multitude of different topics.
So there's just lots of information out there for you.
Well, I think there's more media information about Donald Trump than there has been for any candidate ever. Mm-hmm. And partly that is about the way Donald Trump has run this campaign of putting himself out there, of doing interview after interview, of speaking his mind. In some ways, although I'm critical of Trump, I'm not someone who admires him politically. I like his personality in the sense that he's someone who's willing to speak out, who's not a scripted politician, who's not just reading off a teleprompter, giving the same speech over and over again, saying the exact same things, refusing to respond, refusing to give press conferences or interviews. And I hope that continues. In some ways, it would be a shame if becoming a serious presidential candidate took the Trump out of Donald Trump.
And so you mentioned the media and how much media coverage he's gotten. Do you think there's been more media coverage in general with the presidential race than there has been in previous election years? And do you think the media has really contributed to him being the presumed Republican candidate?
Well, I think they have. Partly, I think the media sort of fell down on the job, that they didn't do enough critical coverage of him. In a lot of cases, I think they just sort of assumed that that he would fall apart by publicizing some offensive thing that he said. And it's been pretty rare that you've seen the media really drill down and corner Donald Trump, because he is someone, although I mentioned he's not a politician in a conventional sense, he's someone who's very elusive in his interviews and what he has to say. And when you have people like Chris Matthews, who pinned him down on abortion and really humiliated him and got him to express something that he then had to retract, that's something that's very rare, that you have the media, take the wriggling of Donald Trump sentences, which go all over the place in an endless stream of diversions, and to try and pin him down. I think that's something that the media needs to do for him, much more than for other candidates. For other candidates, and how the media treats Hillary Clinton, I think there's a desire to just try and get a gotcha moment out of her, or get her to even speak beyond sort of the scripted sound bites that she wants to use. For Donald Trump, it's sort of the opposite problem. He'll go on and say all sorts of strange and interesting things, but in the end, it's hard to pin him down on what he thinks. And so I think that's something that the media needs to do, and perhaps they will start doing.
So it's interesting that you mentioned that, because one of the big headliners in the past few weeks was at one of Hillary Clinton's speeches, the reporters were giving her these incredibly soft questions, such as, how do you feel about being the first woman candidate, and things like that. Do you think it's unfair that the media isn't going after her like they're going after Trump?
Well, I'm not entirely sure that's the case. There have been some media analysis that say that Hillary Clinton has gotten more negative coverage than Donald Trump so far in this election, because there has been a lot of coverage of her emails and all of these things. There's been a lot done on that. Media bias and trying to analyze it is much more of an art than a science, and I know Accuracy in Media and lots of other places try and do that in a quasi-scientific way, but there's an enormous degree to which the biases of the observer really determine where you see the media bias. And so, there are some ways in which Trump gets harsher coverage than Clinton. There are some ways in which she sometimes gets harsher coverage than he does. I think that the point is not so much to play a game of, well, who's getting the worst coverage or who's getting the better coverage. It's the idea of trying to hold all media outlets to a standard of that they should be investigating these candidates, whichever party they're with, and asking them critical questions, and that we should be holding the candidates as well, and saying that they shouldn't get to, in case of Trump, ban media outlets from his rallies because he doesn't like their coverage, or that they shouldn't hold news conferences, as Hillary Clinton has often refused to do. I think there's a responsibility of candidates to be open to the media, and I think there's criticism from both the left and the right that ought to be directed at these candidates.
That's good. So, speaking more about the being that is Trump, I know you've mentioned that he has claimed that he'll become more of a presidential type figure if elected. Do you think, though, that there has been a change from when he began the race to now, where he is the presumed Republican nominee? Do you think that he's become more presidential in that time, or will it just continue on even if he's elected?
I haven't seen any evidence of Trump becoming more presidential. I mean, a key moment was, talking about the judge in the Trump University case, where you had, the original pure Trump in its best form of someone getting personal revenge on someone who he thinks has wronged him, and bringing up the Mexican heritage of this judge, and all of these things that got very strong condemnation from a wide range of the left and the right, almost universal condemnation. And that, to me, is sort of who Trump really is. He's someone who's very arrogant and self-centered and petty. And there are fascinating things about him, lots of entertaining things about him, but I don't see any evidence that he's someone who's capable of changing who he is and spinning on a dime. He's not a traditional politician. He's not somebody who can pivot from and change the way he operates very easily. And he's not someone who listens well to all of the political consultants that a lot of the other candidates have. And that's refreshing. That's what makes Trump popular. That's what makes him different. That's really his only, that's his most powerful advantage, is that he is different, is that he doesn't change who he is. And so he can't really become more presidential without betraying everything that's gotten him to where he is. He's gotten where he is by being Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm. So, like you said, people like him because he's unconventional, certainly unconventional for a presidential candidate. Do you think it's necessarily a wrong thing to have an unconventional president at this time in our country's history?
No, and I think someone like Bernie Sanders, another very unconventional candidate, I think it's a very refreshing thing to have that lack of conventionality, that challenge of conventional authority. And really, Donald Trump is the candidate of political incorrectness. He's the person who comes out and speaks his mind and is unafraid of offending people, and that's a refreshing thing. And I think in many ways it's a valuable thing. Now, I have a lot of problems with what Trump says that are on his mind. I have a problem with the way he operates and his personality and his politics. But in some ways, the persona, the way he approaches politics is, I think, a good thing for the political system, to shake things up, to have something different happening.
So what do you think will happen if he is elected? What will we see in the first few months of his presidency?
Well, that's really tricky to try and figure out, because, again, he's a very unconventional candidate. And so what you would expect for any new president to do, to appoint all these well-known figures, to come out with some 100 days plan of some valuable policy items. I mean, basically what you've got with Donald Trump is that he's going to be very harsh on immigration. He's going to build a wall and make somebody pay for it. And I think he's going to end up doing a lot of the things that he thinks he can do by executive order on his own, because he doesn't have a very strong base of support in the Republican Party. He certainly has a very strong opposition among the Democrats. So if he is elected, I think he's going to very much struggle in the role of president, where he's accustomed to sort of getting what he wants as being the CEO from a very young age, of being the boss. And the president, the role of the president is not the boss. You don't, except to a very small number of people, you don't get to say you're fired, you don't get to control all of these things, you don't get to dictate things. And I think it will be a real struggle for him to try to operate in this very different kind of realm.
And I know a lot of analysts have said that a lot of what he is saying that he will do on the campaign trail will stay on the campaign trail, and a lot of it won't come to be in the Oval Office. But so you think that he will still try to do a lot of it?
Well, I think he'll try to do some of his signature issues, immigration and those others. I mean, all politicians lie, and I think Donald Trump may be someone who on a lot of policy matters is willing to change his course. Certainly you see it on abortion, you see it on all of these other issues where he's quite happy to suddenly change course and compromise and all of those kind of things. And so in that sense, he in many ways may be open to doing things very differently than what he's promised. But I think it partly may depend on how the media and how in debates and in terms of the public, how much they press Donald Trump to stand on certain policy issues, because he definitely does not want that. He wants to give himself a lot of flexibility. He doesn't want to talk about how he's going to defeat ISIS. He doesn't want to talk about exactly what he's going to do with all of these things. He wants to give himself the freedom to switch positions and be a negotiator and get the deal that he thinks he can get. But that's not how the political system operates. The political system operates in that you take a stand, you have a policy position, and then you try to convince the public to implement it. And I don't think Trump is going to be able to operate the way he likes to operate and to do the things he's going to do. In some issues, he's going to stand very strong. In a lot of other issues, he may very well compromise a lot of things that he said. He's not afraid to contradict himself and then to say that he hasn't contradicted himself.
So besides the unconventionality of just his whole person and his campaign. Do you think there's any more positives that he could bring to a presidency that will really work for America overall?
No, I think part of the reason why I'm writing this book is to say there are an enormous number of negatives for Donald Trump, ranging from his personality, his bigotry in many cases, his vindictiveness, his policy positions, in some ways his intellectual laziness, that he likes to give all of his speeches off the cuff. He doesn't like to really think deeply about where he stands on a lot of issues. And I think there are enormous number of negatives about Donald Trump. And in some ways, I think he reflects a kind of coarsening of American culture, of this rise of celebrity and reality TV, of a kind of dumbing down of American culture. So I think there are some ways in which, even though there are some positives to what you could see about him, I see him more as an entertaining figure as a candidate. And I see him as a very alarming figure as an actual president. And I think a lot of people ultimately, even some who may have supported him at times, are also going to take that same perspective, that he's an interesting person to have as your presidential candidate, but maybe not the right person to be president.
Okay. And finally, so if we're not wanting a Trump presidency, are there any other candidates who you think would be better in that position? And I know you mentioned you're a liberal libertarian or something along those lines. So does that mean that you're looking at Gary Johnson, or who is speaking to you right now?
Nobody speaks to me, but we all, liberals end up having to reluctantly say it's going to be Hillary Clinton. I think that's the most common response, and it would probably be my response. I mean, you could give a symbolic vote to a libertarian candidate. I don't agree with all of the libertarian agenda. But I like the idea of supporting third parties and of having something different in American politics. So, there is that option, but I think for a lot of people on the left, people on the right, there's a never Trump movement of standing on principle and not accepting a candidate who you think betrays your values. I think people on the left, even though they don't like Hillary, they don't so much see her as a betrayal of liberal values. Mm-hmm. I think they're sort of accustomed to that by now. And so I think they look at that Trump presidency with so much fear, more fear even than conservatives see a Hillary Clinton presidency, that I think this is going to be one of those elections where most of the people are voting against the other candidate. And when you do that, you support the mainstream candidate. And that's why third parties don't work in the United States.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Once again, this was John Wilson here at our author night with Accuracy in Academia. So feel free to check us out online. Thanks.